Wants to get up. We had a big discussion last week on water quality and what was going on in there. So maybe, if you're not jumping up to the microphone, maybe we can ask Senator Bray where we are with the issue.
With apologies to people who were at last week's, some of this will be a little repetitious, but the major bill for funding the ongoing work of clean water cleanup and for the state of Vermont is S-260, and it will be up on the Senate floor for a vote this Wednesday and Thursday. So it's been a long haul. It was introduced on the first day of the session, and we've been working on it ever since, but it's had 4 committees have all worked on it, and the basic outline of what we're doing is that right now we have we're building the fiscal year 19 budget, and that is actually going to be the broadest and best funded water cleanup budget in the state's history. And that is the good news. But we are looking ahead 1 year beyond FY20, and we can see that there is likely a large shortfall in funding for this work, something in the order of $17 million. And we've agreed that it would be really just unacceptable to fall back from our level of effort. We all know that there are water quality problems, not just in Lake Champlain, but throughout the state. We also have a legal commitment to do this work, both under Vermont law and under federal law. And then I'd say maybe the most important of all is that water is held in public trust, and so we really have a mutual obligation to do good work on making sure we have clean water. So S-260, the heart of it is creating a plan for that funding that we'll need for the long term. Again, we don't need money for the coming budget, but we can foresee that we will need other tools in order to raise revenues for the year beyond. Although, let me pause and there is another perspective on this, and that is the administration hopes that we won't see any such shortfall, that our growth in the state's economy will deliver enough new revenues to the state that we won't need to raise any new revenues. But based on my conversations with the Chair of Appropriations, we've seen that the growth in income for this past year was about $22 million. So this would consume almost all that new growth, and this is also at a time where we have pressing pension obligations that are underfunded, and healthcare costs, as most people know, have been rising at faster than the pace of inflation. So there's going to be a lot of competition for that money, and we just feel that it's prudent to have a plan B. If those new revenues show up, great, but if they don't materialize, we want to make sure that there's no falling off on the clean water work. So there are other things in the bill, but the heart is that economic engine.
Barry?
Yes, in the House this past week, we passed a lake and crisis bill that had to do with Lake Carmine up in the northern part of the state, which is really in tough shape. And the bill is kind of outside the realm of what we have done traditionally for working with cleaning up waters of the state. Historically, what we've done is, matter of fact, I think this is one of the watersheds right here, because it's, isn't this in McKinsey Brook? Yeah. So this is one of the areas where we've set a priority and focus more of the monies in our priority watersheds, which Lake Carmine is one as well. So I'm not sure what the impact is going to be in how that water, the monies work and how they're moved from one watershed to the other, because there aren't enough dollars around to do this project all in 1 year. It's what we agreed to with EPA was a 20-year project and a schedule for moving forward to meet the water quality standards that they have set, and we set some benchmarks for each different watershed. So I'm not sure whether this was a plus or a minus, but there was a lot of sentiment that Lake Carmine was a watershed that really needed some attention, It's a little different than the other watersheds in the state, even though I haven't been up there. I understand it's like it's in a bowl, and all the water runs down in there, and then it has an outlet that it moves out of. But a lot of the water drains in there. Around here, we have water draining in different directions. We have McKinsey Brook that drains, and I believe it heads north, and then it goes into the lake. You have a lot of the watershed along this area that drain directly into the lake, so the farms that are operating on the fields in the area, that whatever runoff there goes directly into the lake versus going into a stream and then accumulated into a central location. Otter Creek is the biggest watershed that comes down through Addison County from Rutland County, that goes directly into the Lake Champlain, picks up a lot of nutrients from a vast area. So anyways, I'm not sure how it's going to work, but it's there. And it goes over to the Senate now, so Chris can take care of it.
Okay, we're open for questions. Yes.
Bob Zelo, Bridport. I'd just like to, I was at the last session and I asked a question and Senator Bray answered it. I'd just like to, there's a lot of good things going on, like Harvey says, and the farmers are doing a lot. But what I heard last week, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm using your inputs, our water quality is still getting worse. Okay, we haven't got even to the tipping point. We are debating about how to fund and what to do and all these things, but we haven't got to the tipping point where it's going to stop getting worse and start getting better. When I first got out of service, I lived up in the northern part of Vermont, and I had my first house was a camp on Lake Carmi. And at that time, yeah, there was an algae problem, but every couple of years, there may be a bloom for 10 days. The lake would turn over and it would go away. And I was there for 4 years and only saw it once. That place is so much worse now. So it's not just about doing something. It's doing enough to stop getting worse and going forward. And correct me, Chris, if I am wrong. Thank you.
No, it is a serious challenge. We had a variety of witnesses, including the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources, and I said, it's the Natural Resources Committee's perception that water quality, sort of like an elevator that's descending, it continues to decline year after year, although we've had programs, and we said, so would you agree that although there's some bright spots here and there, that water quality does continue to decline generally? And she said yes. So there is that sobering reality of it is a big problem, and it's going to take a lot of work, we'll have to make a big investment, and we're going to do it for the rest of the life for everyone in this room. It's not, although our TMDL, our agreement with the cleanup plan with the federal government, the EPA, envisions 20 years of work. It's not as though you finish the project. It's not like painting the room, you get to the last wall, you're done. It is an ongoing effort. And, the scope of the reduction. So roughly 1.5 million pounds of phosphorus go into the lake every year. Under the TMDL, we're aiming to reduce that by 1/3, so 500,000 pounds. But if you look back at how much phosphorus has gone into the lake over the last 50 years, it's roughly 1,000 times that the 500,000 pounds we're trying to reduce. So there's a huge amount of phosphorus that's gone in. I was talking to a guy my age who grew up in Franklin County, worked summers on the farm, and he was recounting stories about taking the farm dump truck down to the railroad siding in Swanton and loading dump trucks full of phosphorus into that dump truck and spreading it on the fields. And he said it was anything but scientific, and he feels like he's confident they over-applied. So the government was providing phosphorus for free. You could go to the train depot and get it. It was, at the time, clearly people thought it was a good idea. It was a way to make crops grow faster. but it also has contributed to unbalanced nutrients out in the environment, and we have a lot of work to do.
Yes, there's not a good answer for you. It's, there's no black and white answer that's out there. And I would just like to say that phosphorus started really accumulating in our lake when Europeans first settled the area, cleaning the forest off the land, and that land eroded. And phosphorus is in all of our soils. It's all around us. It's an essential element in our life cycle, and we use it to grow our food. We use it to keep our bodies functioning properly. It's just there. And we need to recognize that it was in the soil before we came and stripped the trees off the land and had that erosion taking place. We're starting to really understand how the system works now, and we're putting in practices to really cut down on that. But you can't really go and take a measurement any place and say that we've increased or decreased the amount of phosphorus going in. It depends on the weather, it depends on how much rain we've had, times how fast the snow is melting. I mean, all of those factors would change the readings of whatever lake or stream or water body you checked at any given time. But I will say that agriculture really has taken on a huge load in trying to solve this problem. And I said it last week, and I'll say it again, about 40% of the phosphorus going into the lake is directly attributed to agricultural activities. They've agreed to clean up 50% of that phosphorus, and that's over and above. And I know a few years ago, quite a number of years ago, Shoreham, they had to change the way that they were managing their roads and road ditches and stuff, and had to come up with a plan. I don't know if there's somebody here from Shoreham that can speak to that. But anyways, when Shoreham was having some issues with septic issues, and so they put in kind of a municipal septic system that had a discharge out into a wet area. But in order to compensate that, they had to come up with a plan to reduce the amount of phosphorus leaving the land in other ways. And one of those ways was to maintain their road ditches, design their road ditches in a way that would do that. So I think Shoreham's example would be a good learning point for the other municipalities, because every municipality is going to have to come up with a new way of managing their roads. They were supposed to start that 2 years ago. They're still scratching their head as to what their best management practices are going to be and how they move forward with it. I'll say again, agriculture is leading the charge. They've been doing this from day one. We're working on it before, and then when they came out with the new TMDLs and new management practices, they immediately started implementing those. But it's still going to take some time to get to the end that we want to get at. There's no magic solution. We don't have a way to just turn the spigot and say the problem is solved and we can see the results. It's going to take probably about 20 years to do. In Lake Carmine, I'm hoping there's some extreme measures we could take in order to change that. And if that's the case, then we could do it in some of our other watersheds as well.
Other comments?
Hi, Barb Wilson, Shoreham. As I'm here listening to the water quality, it occurred to me the observation I've seen over the last years when we do have a rain event, it seems like we have a catastrophic rain event. And so is that being factored in on the plan, on the fixing the problem? Because it seems like with the way, I look at my property and I've lost topsoil, I've lost all kinds of things that maybe you wouldn't have normally. So how is that being factored in? Because we can, make a step forward, but the different rains and the crazy climate that we have now steps us back. For every step forward, we're going backwards, maybe 5 or 10.
Well, I hope the ratio isn't that bad. one step forward, 10 back. But it's true. So one of the challenges is climate change. And sometimes we because we're talking about it more and more recently, people tend to think of it as a recent phenomenon. But there's quite a lot of data. If you look back and sea level change, temperature change, rainfall patterns that date back 50 and 100 years. Particularly UVM researchers have demonstrated that we tend to get more intense rain events, as everyone's noticing, and they're more frequent. So more intensity and more frequent. And actually, in talking with Secretary Moore about why is it that we've been working so hard on water quality and we're not seeing the gains that we would like to see, and it's it was her analysis that it's because climate change has changed our weather sufficiently to make the challenge even harder. So we have to, that's the reality of where we are, and so that is definitely part of the sort of planning. Harvey mentioned ditching, and along with ditching, there's also culverts. So we've seen a lot of culverts are now sized more, there's more engineering into them about anticipating much larger than average rainfall at some interval. So we have fewer culverts wash out, fewer ditches wash out, fewer roads wash out, as well as, all the farm practices that we've been talking about. So the ideal thing, to step back out of it a little bit is just the design goal is that the ideal thing is to have rain soak into the earth wherever it lands. And it's when we get storm water flooding off the landscape that it picks things up, and that's when we get these problems. So if it's coming off of agricultural land, it naturally is going to pick up phosphorus as it leaves. As a stream rips out stream banks, phosphorus that's in the sediments in that stream also carry phosphorus on out. And then the other sort of challenges are things coming off of parking lots and roads, and those tend to be pollutants, like oil-based things. And some of these things are pretty problematic because they're carcinogenic things that are lubricants and fuels, etc. But so it is a broad challenge. The strength of Act 64, our Clean Water Act, was it said everybody in, and that meant farmland, forest land, municipal land, residential land, developed commercial space. The law applies equally to all land. It so happens we end up fairly often talking about agriculture because Addison County is the #1 agricultural county in the state. And for Lake Champlain broadly, 42% of the phosphorus originates in agriculture. But that means the majority is coming from someplace else. So we're addressing someplace else as well. And Lake Carmi, it's particularly challenging. There, the phosphorus load off agriculture is 85%. So there's it's an extreme case, and S260, like the House, somewhat like the House's Lake in Crisis bill, includes we're calling it a Lake Carmi pilot. It basically says let's use all the tools we've been developing and step up our work effort and treat that 7,700 acre watershed as a living laboratory where we will see how quickly we can turn things around by doing all the best practices we know.
Yeah, we're in a new era, and I got to tell you, everybody's got to work together. Everybody's got to be on the same page. We need a plan for the watershed, not just the road plan or the farm plan. I'll give you an example. I spent $40,000 to fix some problems on my farm to cut down on surface erosion. And it worked great for about 6 years. Then the town decided to move the water from the other side of the road to my side of the road, and now I have a huge water quality problem associated with that. So the municipality and the farmers need to work together. The farmers and the municipalities need to work together. I think we need to work as a team, and we haven't always done that. You can go to a lot of town meetings and the road crew will say, well, if it wasn't for the damn farmers doing this, we wouldn't have this kind of a problem, and yet the water's always drained in the same direction because it always flows downhill. So I think we need to have a better coordination, a better effort made with the efforts in order to solve this problem, because it isn't one group versus another. It's all of us in this together. So when we look at a plot of land, we need to look at every activity that's going on in that area of town. And it could be just a small sub-watershed within a larger watershed that we're trying to solve. But you raised the question of what's being done, and this was an update that we received in the Ag Committee not too long ago, but it basically talks about the impact since Act 64 was put in place. And in 10 major watersheds in the state, we now have 46,200 nutrient management plans. And every farmer has to have a nutrient management plan for every field that they operate on. And that nutrient management plan is a way to assess, because part of that nutrient management plan, you have to take a soil sample every year, or every 5 years, I think it is. And 2 years? Okay. What?
Might depend on.
Well, it's changed a little bit over the years too. It was 5, now it might be 3. I know on my farm they're going to come in and do some of the fields every year, so that in that period of time they don't have to do them all at the end of the period. But anyway, so nutrient management plans are a key tool in how to manage their farms, because it might say that instead of growing 3 years of corn, you can only grow 2 years of corn. It might mean that you have to put a hay crop on there for a longer period of time. It might mean that you have to do the no-till on a regular basis. And when I mean no-till is you don't harvest, or you don't turn your soil at all, you just plant right into the sod and go. And then we have 195 farms that are doing conservation tillage or no-till practices that I just mentioned, and that equals 5,200 acres. And then cover cropping, we have 4,000 acres now that are being done, but I think that number's probably double, because I know a lot of the farmers are doing quite a lot more simply because they know that it works. But if they don't have it done by October 1st, they can't get cost share dollars. So the only crops that are the only acres that are reported to the state are those that meet those crop share dollars. The others are doing on their own. So, because I see the planters going right up until the first part of November, and the crops are doing well and looking good.
Thanks, Harvey. What's the publication year? Is that something that is available?
The agriculture community through the UVM Extension and Agency of Agriculture did a workshop on no-till and cover crop symposium back on March 1st of this year. So just very reasonable, but they had a number of good facts in here that.
Can the general public get a hold of that is what I'm.
I can leave this for you.
Okay, great. Yes.
Bill Keys of Bridgeport, and as most of you know, I live right on the lake shore there, so I'm familiar with it. I can remember many years ago when I first married, drawing a lot of bags of phosphate and what have you from a farmer from the railroad in New Haven. So we had a small truck, and it took a lot of trips to get it. We didn't have the big ones they have today. But my question is, what we hear about what Vermont's doing, what is New York doing about it? Do anybody know? They own about as much lakeshore as we do.
Senator?
Thank you, Bill, for the question. Yes, so it's one lake, and it's shared by Vermont, New York, and Quebec. And there's been an international working group as well as a relationship between the states for decades, and the TMDL applies to everybody. So everyone has a share of the lift, and it's proportional to their contribution to, in this case, phosphorus to the lake. So we're all in this together. It applies not just to Vermont, but to Vermont, New York, and Quebec. Harvey's holding that brochure reminded me, probably, I think one of the best, we've asked for better reporting to help us, the legislature and others, track what's going on all this clean water work. We're making a big investment. We want to make sure it's well done, cost effective. There is a Vermont Clean Water Investment Report that just started a year ago, and if you search for that online, Vermont Clean Water Investment Report, it is a big improvement over the kind of information we used to get before, and it breaks it out by things like agriculture, forestry, municipal roads, natural ecosystem restoration work, and you can see projects, dollars spent for each area, and it's a great publication, and it's online, came out about 2 months ago.
Hi, I'm Renee Sanger, and I live down on the lake. But I wanted everybody in Addison County to be aware that as far as agriculture in our area, we have a group of very proactive farmers. Prior to any REPs being developed, they got together, they're highly educated. It's the Champlain Valley Farmers Coalition. They meet once a month at the extension office in Middlebury. They're welcoming anybody. You don't have to be in agriculture, but they're proactive. They've helped drive some water quality regulations in the state, and if you have an interest in what's going on in the agricultural community as far as water quality, I believe it's the first Wednesday?
First Wednesday.
Of every month at the extension office at 10 o'clock.
Thank you. Dave?
So at the risk of changing the subject, it's going to be an extraordinarily busy week on the House floor. Crossover was just before town meeting day for policy bills, and just last week, crossover was for money bills. So up for consideration on the floor of the House Tuesday and Wednesday is the tax bill. Wednesday and Thursday is the special education bill, and Thursday and Friday is the budget. And there are a few other bills sprinkled in between that will keep us extraordinarily busy on the floor next week. I'm particularly proud of the work our committee did on special education, which should change practices in order to bring better results for our students across the state, particularly our young students who are coming in before they're labeled with an IEP, to give them supports that will keep them off an IEP and help them be successful. And also for taxpayers, do it in a way that probably will save some money going forward. Particularly as the projections are we're going to see kids coming into the school system with elevated issues around mental health and opiate addiction. So we've done extraordinarily good work, and that bill will be up for consideration Wednesday and Thursday.
Yes.
I guess I'd like to go back to clean water if I could for a minute. Renee and Harvey have kind of stole my story here, but I'm Lauren Wood, farm down the road with my 4 sons. We've been working at it for a long time, and we've been kind of ahead of the curve in the water quality issues. I'm on the board of directors of the Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition when we started, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, and we've been very, very, very active. We have field days, we have obviously the monthly meetings, which I'd like to invite you all to see the good work we are doing. We kind of kick stuff around, we learn from each other, which is the best way to learn, I think. If something works good, we publicize it, and if it doesn't work so good, we also publicize that, so we know enough not to try it the other way. At any rate, it's it's the no-till. The craziest thing I thought we ever did. We cut hay on a piece, and then the next day we were planting into the stubble without having touched it. And we had fantastic corn, and we did like 150 acres of no-till last year. That saves the runoff. And after we're done with the hay, the corn, we do cover crops. We're doing more and more and more of that. And farmers kind of tend to take a bad rap, and I'd like to share with all of you the good things we are doing. I'd like to also, I'll invite you, every one of you, anybody that wants to come. I'll give you my cell phone number. It's 989-2071. Call me this summer. I'd love to show you around. I'd love to show you the good things we are doing to help things. And I've talked to Julie Moore, and I think things are getting better. And we shouldn't paint a poor picture of what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Heidi?
Well, I'm Heidi Willis from Salisbury. I was going to pivot just a little bit, so if the gentleman over there wanted to continue the talk on water quality, otherwise, you would? Okay.
Good.
Thank you. I'm John Christiano from New Haven, and I've long been an advocate of New York sharing some of the responsibility for the lake since they own half of the one side of it. So I was really glad to hear Senator Bray mention that this is now being divided up proportionally amongst the three entities that are involved. So my question, Senator, and my challenge to you is, how much are they paying? Because I keep hearing like $2 a parcel in Vermont, and I'd like to know how much somebody in Buffalo is paying.
Senator?
All right, I don't usually get completely stumped by a question, but I'd say I can't tell you at all how much someone in Buffalo is paying for Lake Champlain. New York has its own obligation. Actually, the Lake Champlain TMDL, although we most often talk about the one that was just renewed, the Vermont portion in 2016, there's been one in place since 2002, and that included New York as well back then. So they've been living under a TMDL for 16 years as well, and I don't know how they have an obligation that's measured in terms of performance, in terms of phosphorus emissions to the lake, how they do their fundraising. I mean, I'm sure that they have state and federal money, the same kind of blend that we have here, but I don't know what their budget is.
And now, Heidi.
Okay. I'm Heidi Willis from Salisbury, and I just wanted to take this conversation on water quality and pivot just a little bit. I think we're learning, or we have learned from what's going on with water quality that a lot of our actions on the land that we don't really think about ahead of time or don't know all the unintended consequences of, then end up being not only expensive to solve, but take a long time to solve. So taking that lesson, I'm wondering what has happened with the carbon pollution pricing plan that was proposed earlier this year, the Essex plan. We're all dealing with climate change. The climate change has impacted water quality issues, will impact lots of other things. And the longer we put off addressing that, the more expensive, both in dollars, but time, energy, talents, life, all that kind of thing it's going to be. So if we're not pursuing the Essex plan, what are we doing? We're in an emergency situation. Thanks.
Harvey?
Yes, it's kind of interesting. The House took a little different direction with that proposal this last week, actually, with a regenerative agriculture bill. It deals with water quality, but it allows the Agency of Agriculture to create a environmental stewardship program, and that program is based on meeting all the RAPs, plus going beyond that. But the biggest part of that is carbon sequestration. When we use cover crops and we start building up the organic matter in the soil and start building that together, we have a lot. And I couldn't figure a way to pay the farmers for doing this, so we didn't. We're going to recognize them with a plaque on their front property if they meet all the standards. But you know, we can take out enough carbon just through our farming activities to equate to a couple 100,000 cars a year. And it's kind of amazing, its approach. I'm hoping the Senate will take a little deeper dig into that to see if there's a way to reimburse the folks that are actually providing that benefit for our greater community. And that's going to be a challenge, but it's there. So we've taken, Heidi, we've taken a little different approach to start drawing down some of that carbon.
Dave?
Uh-oh, you said cars. That's my background, of course. And I've been working at having cars pollute less since I got in the business in 1974. We recognized cars pollution earlier than that, of course, and the first pollution controls were to seal fuel systems. It's interesting, you know, when you actually look at the scientific results of what you're trying to accomplish, what you learn that might be surprising. And what we learned in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, was that cars polluted most when they were sitting in the parking lot because gas caps were vented, and so they'd sit there, the asphalt would heat up, and the fumes would evaporate out of the gas tanks, and would pollute the atmosphere. And ever since then, we've been working to have vehicles pollute less. It's very disturbing to me that one of the efforts that's happening now in the state is to postpone yet again the requirement that cars meet pollution standards before they get an inspection sticker. We, meaning the state and the federal government, put this in place in 1997. 1997, it's now 2018, and we are not enforcing the check engine light, which is the car's own message that the vehicle is polluting the atmosphere. So there's an effort in the legislature right now to postpone that yet again. That's very disturbing to me. At the same time, we're looking at, you know, what we're trying to do for clean air and clean water, and we're postponing the work that we could be doing. This notion of climate change and is that, you know, it might be a problem, but it's not my problem. It's somebody else's problem. And until we all embrace the fact that it is in fact our problem, whether it's the vehicles we drive or the way we have farming practices or otherwise, we all need to pitch in and get this done so we save our planet.
Senator.
So in terms of Essex Plan, or underneath the Essex Plan, we've been having a not very productive conversation around carbon emissions and how we might charge for them, or even why we might charge for them. And part of it's because we don't equip ourselves to have the conversation by getting the full financial value. I mean, there's of course a real value to having fossil fuels. They heat our homes, they help us in manufacturing, we use them for transportation, but there's also a cost associated with them in the form of emissions, and those have a dramatic effect long-term on health. So, and then those health impacts are reflected in our healthcare premiums. So one of the things we're looking at this year is trying to make sure that when we look at energy bills, we calculate the positive values associated with that fuel choice, and that we also calculate accurately the costs associated with that fuel choice. And once we can see the pros and cons of the choice, I think a lot of the struggle over a discussion around carbon pricing will resolve themselves when we see the full costs of, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. I don't know myself which way the analysis will go, but what we want is a full, fair, and balanced accounting of the pros and cons of any fuel choice so that we make better choices, and that part of that reflects the externalities that we've kept off the spreadsheet in the past, like emissions causing higher healthcare costs that then come back to us in the form of higher healthcare premiums.
More questions? Will?
Yeah, I'm Will Stevens from Shoreham, and at the risk of going back into water quality, briefly, before I pivot, I want to provide a little context as to how we found ourselves where we found ourselves. And I'll use our farm as an example. For those who don't know, my wife Judy and I own and operate Golden Russet Farm here in town. It's an organic vegetable farm. We moved to Shoreham in 1984. We were one of the few farms we discovered with our first soil test where the farmer hadn't taken advantage of this phosphate program. And our soil levels were quite deficient in phosphorus. So we set about trying to build our phosphorus levels up. We applied compost, we cover cropped, we did use some organic colloidal phosphate and different things. We now have fields that are excessive in phosphorus in 34 years. So how did that happen? I understand math better than I understand soil science, so I'm going to take a quick stab at it. If we apply 10 tons of compost a year with a 1% phosphorus level, that's about 20 pounds. 200 pounds of phosphorus we're putting down. Our crops are taking between 80 and 120 pounds of phosphorus out when we sell them. That leaves an addition of 80 pounds every year of phosphorus in our soils. This is how it happens. So if you want to try to figure out how we're going to reduce the phosphorus levels, we have to pull more phosphorus. We either have to bring less in or we have to take more out. If you think about, from a vegetable grower's perspective, what we actually remove from the field, an ear of corn leaves the farm, the whole stalk stays. So we're not removing much phosphorus. Potatoes, the potatoes go out, that's where the weight is, the greens go back in. So you can see, I hope you can see part of our challenge in managing phosphorus on our farm. And we're not a dairy farm. So I just wanted to put that out there for folks. Now I'm going to pivot and ask a couple geeky legislative questions. I'm interested, I know the House Government Operations Committee was working on an open meeting law bill. I don't know if anybody can speak to where that's at and what that looks like right now. But from our view on the Shoreham Select Board, it looked like it was against an anti-citizen engagement and public participation type of bill in the early stages. I don't know if it's come out of committee in that same form. And the other question I have that comes up a lot, especially from parents of kids, is childcare. What is going on in the field of childcare? This is a real economic development issue, and I'd be curious to hear someone speak to that.
Okay.
I can speak a little bit about childcare. If what you mean by that is care of
0 to 5. A number of years ago, we created a pre-K program that gave a voucher to every child in the state, regardless of wealth. And that can be used in any facility in the state that has a 3 on their way to 4 stars, 4 stars, or 5 stars, or in a public pre-K program for 10 hours a week of care. So 10 hours a week is pretty much inadequate for working families. We have nearly 400 pre-K centers when we have 180 kindergartens. So the notion of pre-K centers being able to access any kind of economies of scale and pay their employees reasonable wages is out of the question. And there's oversight by both AHS and AOE, which is extraordinarily problematic and caused a lot of conflict, angst, paperwork, and problems in these centers. So last year, our committee passed a bill to address some of those problems. It did not make it to the finish line, and instead we required the Secretary of AHS and the Secretary of Education to come back to the legislature with a proposal. They did so. The proposal they came back with was just essentially moving the payment of the vouchers into the Agency of Education, and that was essentially it, which is completely inadequate. But it does reflect the fact that for decades, AHS and AOE agencies have not worked well together. That continues. So the problem is left in the lap of the legislature. The Senate has worked on that, and our House our House Committee on Education has worked on that, there is a fundamental conflict, I'd say, between private centers and public education. And the question is, with kindergarten through 12th grade, we've pretty much decided as a state that we're a public education, that we're going to provide a public education to all our children. In pre-K, it's a different story, and great conflict and problems ensued.
important to note that the lobbyists, according to an article in 7 Days last year, are spending $5 million in lobbying efforts in the legislature to have it their way. Their projection is spending $850 million additional dollars in 0 to 5. $350 million of it would be taxpayer dollars. That's a pretty huge improvement, like increase rather, if you think of maybe 40-cent increase in your property tax bill if we were to go down this road. So it's a very thorny and difficult problem. I'm not sure I see a way to make improvements before the end of this year, although our committee will continue to take testimony and see if we can't make progress. I guess I'll leave it there. There's a lot more to cover with regard to this, but that's sort of the status quo.
Senator Bray.
On the education side, so we're talking about improving pre-K education, and there are a couple suggestions. Dave mentioned, for instance, moving the quality rating of those institutions up. There's a STARS rating system, and there've also been discussions underway about having licensed teachers present a larger percentage of the time. Before we ask those folks, and I think everyone's for quality pre-K education, we're learning more and more about the science of how brains grow and matures, and that those early years are very important years for having a good educational experience. And at the same time, we have a program to help people afford getting child care. There's a subsidy system that makes it more affordable, and that system is underfunded by about $9.2 million. So a lot of the challenge of improving the quality of education, I think, would be improved if the centers themselves received a full payment for the subsidy. If we brought that back up to date, in other words, there would be more income to the centers, teachers could be better paid, which would help with their education as well as turnover. And so before we start leaning on them a little harder in the right direction, better quality education, I hope that we'll backfill and meet obligations that we've already set for ourselves in terms of subsidy.
One thing I wanted to add is what this voucher system did was provide about $3,200 inflated over time to each child in the state to attend 10 hours of pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds. And what this did in the state, in the world of unintended consequences, it shifted the business model for child care and pre-K centers, because there was more money in 3 and 4-year-olds, and they are cheaper to provide quality programming to. So centers moved their slots, or centers opened and closed, and so there's more availability for 3 and 4-year-olds to find places. You'll see, I've seen ads in Front Porch Forum in my area, such and such a pre-K center is having an open house and they have slots available and please apply. Whereas if you have an infant or a toddler, it's virtually impossible to find a slot because the business model has shifted. So that's an additional piece of the problem. One of the things that we're looking at in our committee is the notion of bringing kindergarten down to 4-year-olds. Right now it's at 5-year-olds. So looking at ways to bifurcate the system and put 4-year-olds into public schools, and then focus the child care dollars that Chris just talked about in the 0 to 3-year-olds. So to try to bring some balance back so that we have some infant and toddler positions open up again. So it's an incredibly thorny issue, and we continue to work on it.
Hannah Sessions. I'm a farmer in Leicester, but my question today is about education, specifically House Bill 911, which I was on the school board for 10 years at the elementary level, also at the district-wide level. I was on our Act 46 study committee for Rutland Northeast, which is Otter Valley School District. And the rumor going around is that Bill 911 will take away the incentive payments, the tax incentive payments that we got for merging. So can somebody address that?
Yes, I have a handout I'd be glad to share with you. I have a couple copies. So absolutely not. In fact, prevention was put in place so that what is happening in 9/11 is essentially a lot of different things. But with regard to education, it provides $60 million worth of income tax money into the education fund in order to reduce property taxes. So property taxes across the state would go down for virtually every community in the state, and that creates a situation in some communities where the drop in property taxes runs up against the notion in Act 46 that no property taxes in a merger situation where you have disparate amounts of property taxes. We created a ladder of not more than 5% drop and not more than 5% increase in local taxes in order to reach, the same property tax for every town in the new merged district. So what happened when you dropped everybody is that for a few communities, a half a dozen communities, it took away the 5% protection in Act 46. So we restored that and protected those communities. So absolutely not. That's a false rumor that's going around.
Okay. So in our case, so the first year after we merged, we got a 10-cent reduction, and I think now we're at 4 cents or maybe 2 cents. So we will maintain that.
Yes.
Great. Good answer.
Okay, the other part of Will's question was on the open meetings law. Is there somebody that can speak to open meetings? Nobody knows where that is, Will. Okay. Any other questions? Questions, comments? There's a couple here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dinah Bain from Bridport, and I would like to know what's going on with whatever's being done to mitigate the effects of the federal tax cut that could wind up with people in Vermont actually paying more in their taxes.
Okay.
Somebody.
Representatives, Peter.
Well, Dave's better versed on this than I am, but he's tied up explaining some other parts of the tax bill that he said we're going to be taking up later on this week. The House Ways and Means Committee addressed this issue under the federal tax cuts. There was this weird calculation that Vermont would actually be taking in $30 million more in taxes. This new bill addresses that. It doesn't necessarily give all of the $30 million back to those people. It's distributed a little more progressively than in what would be paid in. But essentially, no, all $30 million will be returned under the new tax bill.
So this will be effective for next tax year?
Correct.
This tax year?
Yeah.
Next year?
Yeah, for the next fiscal year.
Thank you, dear. A question, yes.
I'm going to do yet another pivot. So I'm familiar with the Act 174 planning process, and I was reading a headline not too long ago where I saw that Bennington's Regional Planning Commission had published their plan to do solar siting in that area, and it had been just recently sued by a developer, apparently for a variety of reasons, multiple attack prongs in that suit. And I wondered, I guess perhaps Chris Ray could speak to this, if there's any thought in the legislature or thought of refining the Act 174 to give more support to planning commissions and regional planning commissions against legal endeavors like this, where their plan, goes through the process, does get challenged.
So to back up a little on, so Act 174 was a bill we passed a couple of years ago. It's often called the Energy Siting Act, something like that. The basic thing that we were seeing in Vermont was that we were building out different sorts of renewable energy projects, particularly solar arrays, and a lot of them were landing in highly visible places, like over in New Haven, right along Route 7, for instance. Some people said, couldn't we do better siting than having them in such conspicuous locations, and shouldn't towns have more of a voice in where they land? So Act 174 took the state's overall energy goals and then basically apportioned them to the regional planning commissions, and then municipalities are working with their regional planning commission to say, how are we going to do renewable energy in our town? And if you end up doing a energy plan for your town that's in support of the regional plan, and the regional plan's part of the state plan, then you get special level of influence when you're in a public utility commission proceeding, and that is, in the law, it's referred to as substantial deference. So for those who plan and sort of step up and say, we're going to do clean energy and here's our way to do it, they have a extra power in public utility commission hearings, and the whole point of that was to empower people who wanted to participate to have that level of influence that they did not have under the pre-existing law. So I think for the most part it's playing out pretty well, but it's a new law, and so we're seeing how it unfolds. At this point, there haven't been any discussions about creating funding or extra support for towns that are experiencing pushback on their plans in a legal proceeding. We do have, though, we are coming into the third year of funding that gives technical assistance to regional planning commissions and municipalities to figure out how to do their energy plans. And I'm not sure that any of those dollars, those are really planning and implementation dollars, not legal offense fund dollars. So I'd be happy to talk to you more about it after. We worked a lot with Bennington because they were one of the pilot communities, pilot regions. They went first. They were one of 3. And they wrote a very robust and forward-looking plan. It's unfortunate that, I don't know if, I would just say, no one likes to hear about a suit, but we have a generally negative feeling about hearing about lawsuits. But it is our way of testing the law. And so parties with different points of view about what that law means or how it should be interpreted come before a neutral party, a judge. And so although I would say I myself flinch a little when I hear the word lawsuit, it is actually the way that we sort things out, and we'll have to keep an eye on that, because certainly we do want municipalities that acted in good faith, or regions that acted in good faith, to then be saddled with large expenses defending those plans.
Chris, I have a follow-up question on that. I'm Spence Putnam from Weybridge, and I have to say that Weybridge is one of the communities that benefited from that program. The way it worked in Addison County is that 3 towns were named as pilot towns to develop comprehensive energy planning documents to go into the town plan. And we've been through that process, and what it does is strengthens the town's hand in locating renewable energy facilities. And we got very valuable technical assistance from the Regional Planning Commission. But my concern is that statistics show, and I'm not sure if it's from 176 or other legislation, that there's been a precipitous drop in development of renewable energy facilities in the state. And that's of great concern to me. I mean, going back to the whole issue of climate change, my belief is it's all of the above. We really need to move on every single front. And many of them have a win-win-win factor in them, because a lot of the energy things that we do save people money now, and all of them save our children and grandchildren from even greater costs. So I'm very concerned to see a decline in renewable energy facilities, and I wonder if you can speak to that.
Sure. So there was a report out about a month ago that looked at in our net metering project program in the state of Vermont. So that is the program that probably everyone's heard of. It started out with put solar panels on the roof of your house, spin your electric meter backwards, see how close to zero you can get for the year. So you would zero out your bill. Over time, it grew from small rooftop projects or in your yard projects to much larger projects, all the way up to 500 kilowatts, so 3 acres or so of panels. And so they're really small commercial generating stations. But the same program, net metering, was sort of being stretched to accommodate them all. And so as it turns out, it's relatively expensive power. When you're just spinning your own meter backwards, you're sort of swapping with the utility. But when you have a larger project and you're then selling it to off-takers, it becomes well, the challenge for utilities, it must accept all the power generated, and it's paying for it at a full retail rate. They have the opportunity as your electric company to go find electric power elsewhere, and they can find it much less, even renewable power, less expensively elsewhere in the marketplace. So what we were seeing is that costs were being pushed up, electric rates were being pushed higher by the utilities buying a larger percentage of net metering power year after year. And we're looking at trying to find a new balance point that's as the technology matures and as the scale of these projects grows, to bring clean renewable energy to more people, but at lower costs. So getting all the way back to Spence's question, yes, on the largest arrays saw the largest percentage decline in terms of new construction. As you went back down closer to the smaller arrays, the rooftop arrays for spin your meter backwards at home, those numbers are a lot closer to previous years. And last year was a huge spike in, so if you look at the long-term trend, we're still, if you took a line across all those years, yes, we're smaller than last year's spike, but we're still continuing to grow. And the good news for Vermont is, so we need to watch it. Yes, we need to do more. We need to find a balanced price point. And the good news for Vermont is that on a particularly good summer day, we may see up to 40% of the load, for instance, in Green Mountain Power territory, the one I maybe know best about, delivered out of solar. So it's become, only Hawaii has a larger percentage of its power coming out of solar these days. So we're on the right track. I think Vermont's looking for a balanced way forward, and that's the discussion going on now. The last thing I would say is there is a community energy bill in, and frankly, all the parties said, please don't move this forward now. There's so much change going on. Don't add yet another flavor to the kind of energy program we can sign up for. So I think it's something to watch, and it may be that it will be ripe next session.
With regard to open meeting law, so you all should know, I don't have an idea about this law. So I opened up my iPad, I went to Vermont Legislature, I searched under keyword, I said open, and there were 6 or 7 bills that had the word open in the title of the bill. And I looked at down the list and found H700, which is a bill, and then the list of actions on that. It was introduced in Committee on Government, House Committee on Government Operations, did work on the bill, reported it, passed on the floor, and now it's in Senate Government Operations. So, and then you can access the language as it sits currently in Senate Operations. I have no idea what the implications of the bill are, but that's a way for you to find the path of a bill forward, and then read the bill and find out what's actually in it, or what representatives, like if you know somebody, or you can get the list of representatives in House and Senate Government Operations, and you could contact them with email and say what the heck's in this bill. So those are ways that I have worked very hard over the years to try to make what we do in Montpelier much more transparent and accessible. to every Vermonter, and that's a way that you all can search for any bill about any matter, find out the contents of it, find what committee it's in, and then contact the senators or representatives in those committees to ask questions about what's going on with a particular bill.
Are there more questions? Harvey?
Actually, just, Dave brought up a good point as to how to track what we are doing up there in the legislature. You can also go on, every committee up there is listed, and you can click on the committee that piece of legislation you're looking for is in there, and then you go down and click on agenda, and agenda will tell you what we're doing that week or that day. But also there's a place where you can look at bills, because the bill that's introduced is probably not the bill that we're currently working on. It's made substantial changes over a period of time. So you can look at the most current bill in most committees. I'm not sure if all the committees do that, but I know that the House Agriculture Committee is very good of updating that bill status on a daily basis. So whatever version of that bill we're working on is there, and it's easily accessible by anybody by following the process that Dave said. Just hit on committees and then go to the agenda item.
So we've got our homework. Yes.
Hi, I'm Barb Wilson again. Good discussion on how to find information. I was wondering, like with the folks here, if like maybe through our library or something like that, we had a little workshop, you know, like in the summer or whatever, which would teach people and, you know, project and show you how. Because I know over time, I've learned how to do it, but a lot of people, you know, I get questions a lot, you know, well, how do I find out information about that particular bill or whatever? And, you know, it's just a matter of getting comfortable navigating, you know, the Vermont legislative website. So, you know, maybe that's something, you know, we could offer, and I could, you know, help or whatever, if people would be interested in participating in that. You know, it wouldn't take long at all, but it's just kind of getting you in there.
Good idea. Maybe we can suggest that to the Grange or Farm Bureau or the Chamber of Commerce
absolutely. That would be
as
great.
a sponsored event, as part of this sponsored event as we go along. So, is there a final question, or does anybody want to make a comment about what might happen this week in the budget? Is there something major, a major change that we're going to face? Legislators?
Crystal ball?
You're the guys that are going to have to vote on it this week if it comes up for the vote.
That's why they won't predict.
No predictions.
Well, any veto? It'll pass. It'll face some amendments on the floor, if you're talking about the big bill, the budget. We did some great work, in my opinion. Restored nearly all the health, mental and physical health benefits or programs that the governor cut out of the budget in order to put forward his proposal. So if you're working in a zero-sum game where you've made this determination that you're not going to raise any taxes or fees, then any changes you make to state government require cutting in one area in order to do something new in a different area. And we believe that the House budget does the best job it could for Vermonters. And I'll leave it at that.
We'll be looking forward to hearing the results of that as the week progresses. I wanted to remind you that next week's program is at the American Legion in Middlebury, and it's been touted as the governor's breakfast. But I understand as of today, the governor probably will not be in attendance. But we can still have him for breakfast if that's what you'd like.
I think he ended up doing it, but
Did we scare him off or what?
I have no idea what happened, but
He just doesn't seem to be interested in Addison County.
okay.
Maybe we shouldn't be interested in him.
Okay.
So it's next Monday at 7 o'clock in the morning at the American Legion of Middlebury, and we hope to see you there. Our program is brought to you each week through the courtesy of the Bridport Grange and the Addison County Farm Bureau, with help from Addison County Chamber of Commerce. and of course the Regional Planning Commission. And we remind you there's a little plastic bucket as you leave. A dollar bill in the plastic bucket will help us continue this tradition of Monday morning legislative breakfast. We're the only county in the state of Vermont that does this on a regular basis and that maintains the relationship with our legislators. And we're very proud of that fact. We're very, very happy to continue.